Hello, welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Below, your host. Very pleased to have joining me today, Police Chief for the City of Ann Arbor, James Baird. Welcome back to Conversations.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
And you've been the official chief now for a year and a half, and interim for about 6 months before that. So just over 2 years?
Yes, Chief Cito left at the end of July in 2015.
And even though technically the chief for 2 years, you've been with the department in Ann Arbor for how long?
24 and a half.
24 and a half. How long you could say on the beat or as a patrol person, how long in more administration?
So I started in January '93, and I was a road patrol officer for about 6 years. Following that, I promoted to sergeant and was a first-line supervisor essentially for another 6 years. I then went to a special unit called the Crime Response Unit and worked there for about another 6 years.
Okay.
And promoted to lieutenant at that point, where I worked our professional standards, or what people would refer to as internal affairs.
Okay.
And then I went to the road patrol as a lieutenant. In May of 2013, I became a deputy chief until Chief Cito left.
So you've had experience in Ann Arbor, both sort of as a, in the cars as well as in the offices and doing paperwork more than maybe working directly with the people. What have you found most, you could say, exciting or also most beneficial in you professionally in your role as a member of the Police Department of Ann Arbor?
I think it's been a while since I've been a part of anything truly exciting, but it's...
Which is good in certain ways within the police department.
It is. I think that the biggest thing that I see is, that I'm kind of struck by, is that you really get to see both ends of the spectrum of people. You see people on their worst day of their lives, and you also see them on really good days as well, and see some good come out of people. So I think that's the part that usually strikes me the most.
Within the department itself, when you got started in the early 90s, do you remember about how many members of the department there were, and how has, my understanding is it has shrunk since the early 90s, and with fewer people, are you able to still produce and respond to what the public wants?
Yes, we are. However, we've had to change the way we do things. You're absolutely correct. There's been a significant staff reduction over time. I think in our heyday, in the probably early 2000s, we were over 200 officers.
Wow.
215, I think, at our highest point, and we're at 122 now. So obviously, pretty significant reduction. We had gone down even below that to like 108 or 109 at one point. One of the things that we've had to do is we're not quite as specialized as we used to be. So we used to have people that would handle a very specific type of situation, and then others that would handle something else. And we've had to kind of change the way we do that. So now we try and have people be more of a multi-purpose tool as opposed to a screwdriver or something like that. So it's been significant.
And as the chief now for 2 years, have you seen a shift or change in the people that you're working with? I mean, are they skilled in more areas, or do you have to sort of make do with what you have?
No, we still get very highly qualified candidates for police officer. Ann Arbor tends to be a destination agency, so we will steal from other agencies shamelessly.
Stealing is not something
right, but we'll steal good staff from anywhere we can get them.
Yeah.
And what we ask of a police officer these days, frankly, it isn't even fair.
Yeah.
We ask them to be so good at so many skill sets that are often somewhat contradictory and intuitive. So we ask quite a bit. But the police officers today, the biggest change that we see is the technical savviness is not what I came on with.
Right.
So.
Well, with that technical savviness and that, as an administrator more than the traditional, you could say, foot patrol person, do you get a sense that the relationship between the police officer on the street and you as the chief or the administrators, do you have a fairly positive relationship, or are there still issues that you could say you're in conflict with? As you say, they're expected to do so much. Is that because fewer people, so they have to? Is it because you and the administration are telling them they have to?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. It is. We ask a police officer today to be somebody that can be a mentor, can be a coach, can be a bouncer, we're holding people accountable, but at the same time, we're trying to build relationships in the community. And as you're aware, police community relations all across the country is a very, people are looking at it very in-depthly. And so we're trying to kind of bridge the gap in some communities that maybe feel like they're a little less important. And we ask people to be able to do so much. The same officer that gets called to arrest somebody that's being violent is the same officer that might have to comfort a lost child or something like that. And those are skill sets that are often on different ends of the spectrum, but we expect the police to be good at everything.
And in that community relations that you mentioned, Ann Arbor has at times in the past, say 3 to 5 years, had incidents where different, as you say, community groups might call into question the role or how police will respond to their group. How do you, is there special training? How is an officer prepared to handle those different types of situations?
Well, we train officers in many ways. So there's some things that they get training for, kind of what you would call a high-risk, low-frequency occurrence, like the use of a firearm. They have to be proficient at that, because if they do need it, it has to be, they have to have that skill set there. But it's a perishable skill, so you keep going at it. There's other things that we kind of hit in an exposure level. So one of the things, somebody that is suffering from, say, Alzheimer's, somebody that might have something on the autism scale, somebody like that might be exhibiting behaviors that traditional law enforcement might raise red flags for, and so we try
react to in a confrontational way, or a direct threat to them and their persons.
Right, and so in the hearing impaired is another group. They're not going to be they don't have the ability to hear the commands that they're being given. So we try and expose the officers to different groups and what might be kind of unique about policing or interacting with that group. But it's not something that's really new. It's just that we kind of hit it somewhat cyclically.
Right. And in looking at that, one of the things that Ann Arbor, and I would assume many different communities over let's say the 24 years you've been involved with the city, is the, you might say, approach of policing, whether it's neighborhood policing and having had almost like local precincts throughout the city of Ann Arbor. The proactive efforts when you had a much larger staffing where the people, officers could, almost walk the neighborhoods and have specific officers in one area so that neighbors would get to recognize a face, recognize a person. Today, is it, as you say, pretty much all things to all people, and whoever's available when the call comes in will go in response?
Yes, you've identified the biggest downside we've seen to the staffing reduction is we have to some degree lost that relationship. It used to be that we had a group of officers that would work in a particular geographical area. They would know the players.
Right.
The reason that's so helpful is because if I know you because I've been interacting with you for years.
Business owners having the same face when they make a call.
Right, and even somebody that is not encountering the police under ideal circumstances, if I have a relationship with that person prior to that worst day of their life, that can make that interaction go much differently than somebody that I'm meeting for the first time. So that is the biggest issue.
Have you, as the chief, looked at how you might say assign, or how you approach both the reactive policing? Is there still any proactive policing going on?
There is, but it's more limited. With the reduction in staff, obviously it's more limited. We've had to try and target our efforts in certain ways. One of the things that seems to be a very big issue in Ann Arbor is traffic safety. And so we have...
I thought it was the giving of tickets for traffic. Yeah.
We actually have been giving out a few less tickets recently, and I'll explain why. So it used to be that if people would have a traffic complaint, they would call in, we try and assign staff to it. Maybe we're hitting it during the time, maybe we're not. Now we have an online form they can go in and fill out. And so they can help really focus our efforts. So if the people evaluating those might say, hey, I've got 4 complaints of the same problem, we can dedicate some resources to that and hopefully address that issue. So we try and be a little smarter about it, kind of policing with a purpose.
Well, as you mentioned, filling out forms and giving the people an opportunity to identify. And that's, once again, working with the community, because you can't just assume someone else has called it in.
Correct.
In other words, if you have a complaint about people driving, speeding through your neighborhood, cutting through your neighborhood to connect from Washtenaw Stadium or something, you can't just assume someone else has filled out the form.
Right. And
because you're not going to be able to respond.
Yes, and you've identified another big issue is we'll go to these community meetings and people say, well, I have this problem and this problem happening, but they haven't called us. And
right.
We only have at any given time, a certain number of officers out there. So the likelihood of them running across that problem independent of kind of having it put on their radar can be problematic. And
you mentioned having them, patrol officers, available to sort of keep an eye on. What is the basic, you say, not staffing, but 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, or is it a 4-10 system, or how do you staff people? Because you have to have staff 24 hours a day.
Right. So one of the things that we've had to do recently is you can kind of get the most bang for your buck out of a staffing model that involves a longer shift. An 8-hour shift is more difficult to staff because you need 3 shifts,
right,
as opposed to 2 is what we have right now. Under the officers work 12-hour shifts. Okay. So they'll work 3 days in a row, and then once every 2 weeks they also have an 8-hour day that they'll work, and that will get them to their 80 hours.
Okay. And that provides, do you base how many you need at a certain time of day based on historical records, and I would assume different days of the week different needs are met?
Yes, that's true. We tend to, on the night shift, we'll try and staff the weekends a little more heavy, but during the daytime, it's actually during the week that we need a little more coverage. So we also have an overlap shift. So the officers work 7A to 7P or 7P to 7A, and then there's also an overlap shift that comes in at 4 p.m.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a short break and come back and look at some of the specific, you could say, time periods within the year. We just got done with the art fair and other things coming up where the department can help the people ensure that they're safe and that they help you in that sense. Ask our viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
I am walking today to support my daughter. I'm hoping that there's going to be something that will allow her to live differently than she's living now and more freely.
The more people we can get involved to support the food allergy awareness community, the better.
Having all the people here at the Fair Walk, I feel the love and support. That's huge to us. That's everything.
Join us at Fair's Food Allergy Heroes Walk. Register at foodallergywalk.org.
Let me ask you a question. What do you value? How about access to your child's education, their football game, their swim meet, their high school musical, their academic future? Does that matter? What about your access to your government, your police, fire, and public safety, parks and recreation activities, state and local officials, the folks you elect to make decisions for your community? Is that worth anything to you? What about your rights, freedom of speech, to communicate your message, to let your voice be heard? That's got to count for something, right? So let me ask you again, what do you value? How about public, educational, and government access television? It belongs to you. Let's keep it that way.
Hello, welcome back to Conversations. I'm speaking today with James Baird, the police chief of the city of Ann Arbor. Talked some general things before, but one of the things in Ann Arbor, it seems there are certain times in the year that there is either a need for, or I would assume, more police presence. We just got done with the art fair. What role does your department play with respect to the art fair and working with the different art fair groups and committees?
That's a good question. We have, so as you're probably aware, there's 4 different art fairs that kind of all come together. And so once a month, the groups meet with a lot of the stakeholders, and the police department has a seat at that table. So planning purposes, that kind of thing. We obviously are the kind of the bigger face of security for the event. Now, last year's art fair came at kind of a unique time. It occurred within a short period of time after the Nice, France attack, where the truck went down the street. And it also happened within a few days, I believe, of the Dallas shooting of the 5 officers. So one of the things we did last year because of the attack in France is we tried to harden the site a little bit, especially to vehicles. So we have about 500,000 people that they estimate come into town for the art fair during the 4 days. Obviously very soft target, it's porous borders, but we figured we could do something about the vehicles. So we took some last minute steps to put concrete barricades at the end of some of the streets. The other thing we did is we doubled the staffing of the police officers that were dedicated to the event. But in addition to that, I required anybody that's a sworn officer to walk for at least a couple hours, regardless of their assignment. So every detective, I was out there, our community engagement
Now, is that true
people.
for this year also?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And so you probably saw an increase in staff for the last couple of years, and that's one of the main reasons for that. So.
Well, when you increase staff, you still have the rest of the city that you still have to maintain, you say, staffing for.
Correct.
Do you call upon surrounding areas, surrounding police units to support, or is that all still done within the city?
For the art fair, it's still done within the city. Now, if something were to occur where we needed a lot of staff members right away, that is something where we would have the ability to draw on some of the neighboring jurisdictions. But what we do is we'll dedicate 20 people, or excuse me, 13 to 15 people to the event at any one time, plus whoever happens to be working that's walking during that time period.
Right. And so that, in the last, 3 years, 2 or 3 years, it has shifted from a Wednesday to Saturday and now a Thursday to Sunday time period.
This is the second year of that.
The second year of that, okay. Now, from your department's perspective, has there been any change by adding a Saturday night where it is not a takedown, but it is, once again, a full Saturday evening part of the fair?
No, we haven't really noticed any increase in activity or anything like that related to that component. What we saw, the biggest change we saw, was that now that the event was occurring on Sundays, some of the houses of worship in the downtown area are completely enclosed by the art fair borders, so there was an access issue.
Okay, and are they available on Sunday morning for the most part, or is it a matter of making sure people know where they can park, because that's one of the key factors, and being able to get then to their house of worship?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, we're in August, and we're getting ready for what I would assume to be another sort of key time period, and that is university move-in. And in past years, in talking, there are things that both the university students, parents, families, those who are coming to help can do, because it's not like their home where they can sort of leave things around, where they don't have to sort of think about it. What are some tips that the department would give to incoming students, whether they be freshmen in the dorms or upper class moving into apartments around the campus area?
It'll sound very basic and simple, but be aware of your surroundings and lock your door. Locking your door would significantly reduce the amount of theft crime that we end up getting. There's so many times where and if you think about it in the student environment, people leave their door open all the time because their friend next door might pop over, and so it's a culture thing that's kind of difficult to get past.
Have you seen in your 24 years of going through this, have you seen crime sort of efforts where they come into town because they know students are coming in and that there are potentially easier marks to go after material in that?
Absolutely, yes, we see that every year. There's people that want to break into homes that know when the students are gone for break, and so yes, we have absolutely.
So it's not just a crime of opportunity, it's planned ahead of time that this is where, for these 10 days or these 5 days of move-in that, we're going to be walking around sort of watching out.
Yes, I think it's actually both. I think you will see the ones of opportunity, and those are the easiest ones to prevent, is to reduce the opportunity. But we also see some more direct effort.
Sort of organized in a sense. Okay. Then you have football, U of M, where you have 110,000 coming in for a 6-hour time period, potentially. You have the traffic issue and all the surrounding issues. What role does your department play with respect to the time period on those Saturdays for football games?
Well, the Ann Arbor Police, our primary role is to get people into and out of town safely. Yeah. And so we handle all of the traffic components outside the stadium. And so that's before the game and after the game, obviously. And then during the game, we will also be in the stadium supplementing their staffing in there. Right. But primarily, it's mostly traffic related.
Okay. And I would say, and that is creative in Ann Arbor when you have construction and other things going on, which is supposed to be done and cleaned up, but who knows if it will.
Yes.
Yeah. Once again, in your 24 years, have you seen a shift or a change in I would say not the traffic flow, but sort of how people approach football Saturdays? The crowds are still, you could say, haven't increased or decreased significantly.
Right.
Attitude of the people, is it, pretty much the same old, same old?
The attitude's been better the last couple of years, I'll tell you, because the team's been doing better, obviously. But the football crowd is actually pretty well trained. What we find is that when some of these other events come to town, like the hockey game or the soccer game, that's a whole different group of people. So they don't understand that we have that one-way system that shuffles everybody out of town down Main Street. So those tend to be a little bit trickier. But the football crowd, they've been doing this a long time, and they know the drill.
And many of the people come to every game or come every year if it's for their home team coming to play, so they're more accustomed to it in that.
Absolutely.
If there were one or two things that, looking at the issue of the police department and the people of Ann Arbor, what would be one or two things that you would like to see, you say, get better or improve, or things that you think either the department or the people could do to make life easier for everyone?
That's a big question. So as you may be aware, right now we're in the middle of a external audit of the police department after the officer-involved shooting we had in 2014. We worked with the Human Rights Commission to come up with a firm to come on and kind of take an outside look at the department and see how we're doing. So we're waiting on the results of that. I expect them soon, but the Hillard Hines, the group that did this audit, they did a very proactive job of reaching out into the community and trying to connect with various groups. And so we're hoping that at the end of this, they can help us to more accurately identify some of the issues, and then we can work from there.
Right. And in this, both audit as well as working directly, how can a community person who has a concern or a complaint, how can they share that without feeling threatened, so to speak?
Well, I can't speak to how they might feel, but I can say that we will take complaints about our employees in any way, shape, or form. It can be anonymous, it can be third party, written, by telephone. Each and every complaint will be investigated, and we will respond accordingly based on what we find.
And how often does that happen?
We take, I would estimate probably 30 complaints a year is probably
that you would identify as not necessarily serious, but legitimate. It's not just, I didn't like the fact the officer sped by me while I was stopped at the traffic light.
No, actually, most of them are more along those lines.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
We tend to have very few external citizen complaints. Those 30 that I talked about might include an internal complaint as well.
Okay.
So it probably closer to 10 to 15 external
So maybe
citizen
one a month.
complaints.
Yeah, starts
1 to
coming in.
2 probably would be a good.
And looking in your time at the role that the police department plays in dealing with crime, how would you describe crime in Ann Arbor? Now, and by that I don't mean, well, it's it's good, because there's no such thing as good crime. But has there been an increase, decrease? Have you seen a shift in the type of crime? Has the economy getting better, so to speak, the last 2 to 3 years? Has it shifted again?
Crime overall is down, and it has been for the last couple of years. However, the statistics that we look at are the things that are reported. Right. So those are always tricky, because only a certain percentage of crime will be reported, and as the number of officers is reduced, some of the crime that we report is stuff that the officer initiated. So it's something that a citizen, so the fewer people we have, the fewer of those types of crimes will be reported. But generally speaking, crime is down and has been down for the last several years.
And there was a time, I want to say in the late 2000s, turn into the teens, it seemed to have gone up as the economy had gone down in southeast Michigan, that Ann Arbor is viewed as a more affluent community. And that's more in what, sort of the theft and the break-ins and that. Across the board, has crime tended to go down over the last 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, and there's exceptions, though. There's some types of things that we will see spikes in. If we see, for example, if somebody's breaking into cars, they don't break into one. They'll go from one to the next to the next, and so we might have a lot of those cases in a certain smaller time period, but it's all 1 or 2 people doing it. And
I would think that's the type that may or may not get reported. I mean, you get up in the morning, someone broke the window of your car.
Yes.
The last thing you want to do is sit for what you think might be an hour waiting for someone to come and respond.
Because a little change is missing.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that we're seeing more of is particularly during tax season, is the fraud related to filing income tax. I myself was a victim.
Oh, wow.
And so what we find is that those types of crimes have gone up a little bit as the ability
technology becomes more widespread and available to people.
Correct. People can victimize somebody from the other side of the world now. So.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and updating the people on what your department is doing, but also how they can be involved in helping each other in many ways. It's not just helping you, it's helping themselves.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us today and look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.